Good morning and good afternoon, distinguished participants. I would like to express my heartfelt appreciation to GNL Global for inviting me to participate in today's event. My name is Adrian Sookhan, a gas market analyst at the Gas Exporting Countries Forum in Doha, Qatar. My presentation today is the prospects for LNG expansion in Latin America and the Caribbean. So these are just some of the main items which will be discussed during my presentation today. So let's start with who is GECF. So GECF is an intergovernmental organization of the world's leading gas exporting countries, which provides the framework for exchanging experience and information among member countries with the objective to increase the level of coordination and strengthen the collaboration among its members. GCF member countries account for around 72% of proven natural gas reserves, 43% of marketed production, 55% of exports by pipeline, and 50% of exports via LNG. In terms of LNG imports in Latin America and the Caribbean, it trended downwards between 2019 and 2020, but rose sharply in 2021. Argentina and Mexico contributed notably to the decline in LNG imports at the end of the last decade. This was due to higher gas production in Argentina and stronger pipeline gas imports from the US to Mexico. In addition, the negative impact of COVID-19 on gas demand also weighed on the region's LNG imports. However, in 2021, LNG imports rebounded sharply due to the lower hydro output, particularly in Brazil and Chile, as a result of one of the worst droughts in a century. The situation has since improved in 2022, driven by higher hydro output, with LNG imports in the region declining by around 36% between January and October this year. On the export side, Latin America and the Caribbean's LNG exports fell sharply over the last 2 years. This was attributed to lower feed gas availability for LNG exports in Trinidad and Tobago. Furthermore, unplanned outages in Peru also contributed to the decline in exports in 2021. In the first 10 months of 2022, higher feed gas availability in Trinidad and Tobago and lower maintenance activity in Peru drove the region's LNG exports higher. With regards to Argentina's LNG exports, the country exported very small volumes in 2019 and 2020 before exports were halted in October 2020. Let us now look at the electricity production by source in Latin America and the Caribbean. Between 2010 and 2020, electricity production in the region grew at an average annual rate of around 1.6% from 1,400 terawatt hour to 1,630 terawatt hours. The stronger electricity production came mainly from renewables, natural gas, and biomass and waste. In terms of the electricity mix over the last decade, hydro is a dominant contributor to electricity generation in the region. However, the shares of renewable and natural gas increased to the detriment of hydro, oil, and biomass and waste. If we zoom on the electricity mix in Latin America and the Caribbean, we can see there are 16 countries that have oil as a dominant fuel in the electricity generation. Majority of these countries are small island states in the Caribbean. Although these countries account for just 5% of total electricity generation in the region, it offers significant potential for further development of small-scale LNG in the Latin American Caribbean region. So what are the plans for the development of new LNG regasification capacity in Latin America and the Caribbean? There are currently around 70 million tons per annum of existing regasification capacity in the region. However, the utilization rate was just 25% in 2021. In the next 2 to 3 years, Around 20 million tons per annum of new regasification capacity is expected to be commissioned in several new important countries. One project is the El Salvador FSRU, which has already commenced operations this year. Furthermore, Antigua and Barbuda and Ecuador are expected to start receiving LNG via ISO LNG containers in 2022. Ecuador has already begun imports and received several ISO containers with LNG from Panama. Let us now turn our attention to the expansion of LNG exports from Latin America and the Caribbean. So, higher feed gas availability is expected to support the increase in LNG exports. This comes from the startup and ramp up of new upstream gas projects in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago has also asked the United States to allow the country to import gas from Venezuela to boost LNG exports from its existing liquefaction plant. The National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago is also planning to develop a small-scale LNG hub with a capacity of 500,000 tons of LNG for export to Caribbean islands by 2025. With regards to the development of new liquefaction projects, two projects are currently under development. The Costa Azul facility with a capacity of 3.25 million tons per annum in Mexico, and the Firebird LNG project in Suriname with a capacity of 4 million tons per annum. Finally, there are several planned liquefaction projects in Latin America and the Caribbean, including the LNG Amigo project in Mexico and New Fortress Energy's floating LNG facilities to be deployed in Altamira, Mexico. Just recently, YPF of Argentina and Petronas signed an agreement to explore the feasibility of building an LNG facility in Argentina. In conclusion, I would like to mention the following. So Latin America and the Caribbean's LNG imports are highly susceptible to weather, particularly drought conditions. The region's LNG exports have been impacted by feed gas availability. Oil substitution in the electricity sector could support higher LNG demand. Around 20 million tons per annum of new LNG import capacity is currently under development. And finally, there's significant potential for expansion of LNG exports from Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Adrian. I would like to add that the most recently announcement was on Friday for Venezuela. There was announced a potential FLNG. It's something new. There is not so many explanations about the project, but it's something that probably we might look at and consider. Adrian, we have some questions for you in the chat. And the first is, what are the challenges for the expansion of LNG imports in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, in my view, there are two main challenges for the expansion of LNG imports in the region. First is the lack of available infrastructure for LNG imports. As we saw during my presentation, the countries where there's potential for oil to gas substitution are mostly in Caribbean islands. Most of these countries, they don't currently have existing import infrastructure. So to build this infrastructure, they would need financing. And this is another challenge because they would have to depend on foreign investors to come into the country to invest in these projects. Another challenge that we see is the current price environment. So this year, we have seen record high prices and high volatility. So the current high prices makes oil a bit more competitive than LNG. So then this could delay buyers in the region to switching away from oil to gas. So to tackle this challenge, they could consider looking at different pricing mechanisms. As Alex mentioned in his presentation earlier, it's always better to have a mix of prices for both the buyer and the seller.
Thank you, Adrian. Another question here also for Latin America. What countries in Latin America and the Caribbean do you think that will improve their security of gas supply?
So based on the current developments, so I would say that I think Brazil would probably be the one to improve the security of gas supply. So currently around 70% of total LNG imports in the region is from the spot market. So we don't have a lot of long-term contracts for the supply of LNG. And this is due to the fluctuation in demand. So as we saw in 2021, okay, because hydro levels were low, they went to the spot market to buy more LNG. So I think Brazil has because they're building so much new facilities as well. So to reduce the exposure to the spot market, I think maybe we might see some medium or long-term contracts to secure their gas supply for the future.
Cannot hear you, Kenna.
Thank you. I was with the mic off. Thank you, Adrian. There's many questions, but we need to move forward. We will take all these questions and we will forward it to you. Now we would like